presence here to hear our presenters and our discussion today. তো আমাদের presentation এখানে চারটা paper হবে and 3 of them are being presented online, and so the presenters are online, but we can still ask them questions এবং ওনারা উত্তর দিতে পারবে। The fourth paper is being presented live, and we're very glad and grateful for that as well. And I have been asked to introduce the papers at the beginning, so I will say a few words about it. Even though I've allowed 5 minutes to talk about the papers, I will not take my 5 minutes. Okay. So basically, I don't know what your background is, but this session is entirely focused on international rather than regional connectivity in some kind of abstract or internet or network sense. Okay, so this is talking about the flow of goods and services across countries. That is what the goal is. So the papers that we have, typically international trade papers will always try to see what could increase and improve international trade. Because as trade economists, we always believe that better trade or more trade is beneficial. So the intent of most of our research is to see how we can have more trade. So ওটার যদি আমরা intention নিই, তাহলে we will see that these papers pretty much that. The first paper that we have asks the question, do natural disasters translate into trade disasters? And when I introduce it, I'll introduce the presenters. But basically, it's also saying that a lack of natural disasters will lead to more trade. So we want to minimize natural disasters to promote trade, but we also want to ask the question, the natural disasters, kiভাবে trade is reduced. How does it reduce the amount of trade that happens between them? So that's a very universal question, and it does not pertain only to Bangladesh. However, it is interesting that the authors do focus quite a bit on developing. So we can learn quite a bit from these papers. আমাদের দেশের জন্য অনেক কিছু শিখতে পারি, we take. And then the next paper is the role of institutions in promoting exports. And it's an econometric paper. It's a gravity model. It's a pan-data approach. So the role of institutions in promoting development is a very old thing. It has been around for the last 30 years or so. সবাই এই রিসার্চটা করছে। প্রথমে মানুষজন বলে institutions অর্থাৎ কি? ইনস্টিটিউশন বলতে আমরা অনেক সময় বুঝি ল অ্যান্ড অর্ডার, আমরা বুঝি ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচার, আমরা বুঝি ইজ অফ ডুইং বিজনেস, অনেক রকম মেজার থাকে of what institutions are. এবং অনেকে গবেষণা করেছে institutions improve করলে how will development also increase. I probably shouldn't talk in Bangladesh because I'm a South Asian audience. So I'll switch to English. I'm sorry. But this is an interesting paper because it's asking you something new, which is how do institutions improve trade? And so again, it focuses quite a bit on development. So both these papers are very good because they focus on trade and development together. So the third paper that we have is looking in particular at India, and it's looking at the trade agreements that India has made. India is a large country and it has many trade agreements. It pales in comparison to the number of trade agreements in the US, but nonetheless, India does have quite a lot of trade agreements. So our authors here have tried to measure a trade agreement, say something called rules of origin. How do those rules of origin promote or restrict trade. When we come to it, you'll find out what these things are. So I will say no more. And then the last paper is completely focused on Bangladesh. And it will be very interesting for us because what it's doing is looking at the effect of a seaport on our economy. Now, a seaport will lead to more trade. So in a way, there is an indirect question. How will, firstly, the investment in the seaport, and then secondly, all of the trade generated through the seaport affect it? I had promised not to talk too long and I violated that, so let me get to the papers right. Okay, so the first presenter is online and the paper is Natural Disasters Translate into Trade Disasters. The presenters are Dr. Swati Saini, Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Delhi. It is also authored by Dr. Devasmita Jena, who is Assistant Professor of Economics at the Madras School of Economics. And the third author is Dr. Yashobanda Parida, and uh, who is Assistant Professor at the Flame or Foundation for Liberal and Management Education University in India. That will be online, so I would request the authors to please come in and do their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I'll just start. Good evening, everyone. So this is one of the co-authored papers that I'm presenting today, and it's on how natural disasters impact bilateral trade. So the work that I'm presenting today, it is still a work in progress. So all comments and suggestions are welcome. Um, so give me 1 second. So for some reason, my screen is stuck. Um,
I think it's like
Uh, so one of the most visible consequences of climate change is an increase in the intensity and frequency of these extreme weather events. And consequently, there has been an increase in the scale of their impact in terms of affected population and economic losses. The existing literature that analyzes the impact of natural disasters on socio-economic activities. So most of these existing literature finds that due to natural disasters, there is a decline in economic growth, there is an impact on employment and productivity. Uh, but these repercussions that they talk about, they can extend beyond the boundary of a single nation. It can affect multiple countries because today, in today's world, we are interconnected through international trade. So in this globalized nature of the modern world, if a natural disaster is happening in some other country, so my country also can be susceptible to the economic fallout that happens because of that. If we look at the literature that talks about the link between trade and natural disasters, it talks about two channels through which disasters can impact trade. So one is a negative channel and other is a positive channel. So trade can get negatively impacted due to production losses that can happen due to destruction of human and physical capital, due to destruction of transport infrastructure. The income can get affected due to changes in demand for imports. Uh, on the other hand, due to natural disasters, there can be a positive impact on trade. So the trade can act as a shock absorber as it allows for the supply shortage in affected areas to get compensated by imports from unaffected areas. Also, it has been observed that imports of developing countries, they increase after a major natural disaster due to large inflows of external aid. Also, it can increase due to consumption smoothing effect. Now, most of these papers, they are aggregative in nature. The existing literature that works in this area, the literature is quite aggregative in the sense that most of the papers, they do not report sector specific results. Now, natural disasters can affect economic sectors differently, depending upon the industry's preparedness, the type of disaster that has hit the industry, the regional vulnerability. So it's important that we have some sector specific study. Now, a few empirical studies, they do report sector specific results, but the results are mixed. So some of them find that agricultural trade is positively impacted, whereas industrial trade gets negatively impacted, and some find exactly the opposite. Now, a limitation of this existing study is that these studies that do report sector specific findings, they focus on specific regions of the world. They are not focusing on all the regions of the world. So motivated by these observations, our work examines how natural disasters and its subtypes affect trade in agricultural sector and manufacturing sector for a panel of 180 countries during the time period of 1988 to 2019. If I very briefly talk about the major trends and patterns, then for the period of our study, we observed that for both set of countries, developed and developing, there has been a rise in the total number of disasters, but this rise is relatively more for developing countries. And if I talk about in terms of types of disaster, then drought, storm, and earthquakes are the most frequently occurring disasters. Uh, I'll skip this to just to save time. So if I talk about manufacturing trade, again, the trend says that the pattern of trade has been that during our period of study, there is an increase in manufacturing trade for both groups of countries, but relatively more for developed countries. And we find same pattern for agricultural trade. There are some, but for some years, developed countries as a group, they are overtaking in the agricultural trade, but more or less developed countries are uh, are uh, overtaking in the agricultural trade. Uh, Given these patterns and our motivation, so we employ a structural gravity model to study how natural disasters impact bilateral trade, and we use a PPL estimator to do our estimation. So we are estimating this equation number one. So my dependent variable is trade flows. So trade flows from country I to country J in time period T, and our major variable of interest is this explanatory variable is this interaction term between number of disasters which are happening in either in the exporting or the importing country and INT. So before I explain this interactive term, a little bit about the gravity model. So generally when we estimate the gravity model, so the standard approach is that we include all types of fixed effects so that we account for multilateral resistance terms. So we have these country effects, year effects. So generally when we have these country fixed effects, what happens is that if I have a country specific variable as one of the explanatory variable, I won't be able to estimate its impact because it will get absorbed into my country fixed effect. Now, a way to tide over this problem, a solution that has been proposed is that we introduce a dummy variable. So that dummy variable takes up a value of 1 for all international trade flows and takes up a value of 0 for domestic trade flows. And we interact this dummy variable with the country specific variable. So in our case, we have this total number of disasters in a country as the country specific variable, and we are interacting with this dummy variable. And then we are estimating this equation. Now, another advantage of this approach is that theoretically, we know that when we look at the gravity model, it does not exclude these domestic trade flows from the framework, from the theoretical framework. So in a way, when we use this kind of methodology, this approach, it is consistent with the theoretical framework also. But there is a limitation. The limitation is that since this is a country-specific variable, it will not change its value when the country is acting like an exporter vis-a-vis when the country is acting like an importer. So if I want to know the impact of this country-specific variable on my trade flow when the country is acting like an exporter as compared to the other case, I won't be able to differentiate this impact because the values of the country-specific variable won't change for the two cases. Therefore, our estimates, they depict the impact of a natural disaster in a country pair on international trade relative to intra-national trade. And we cannot distinguish between the case when natural disaster is happening in the exporting country, then what happens as compared to the case when it becomes an importing country. Now, these are the data sources. So if I talk about the main results, so if I look at the agricultural trade, broad result is that disasters have a positive influence on agricultural trade, and earthquake, magnitude-wise, earthquake has a more impact. If you look at manufacturing trade, the impact is negative, except for storms. So interestingly, for storms, we find a positive impact. Now, we did another set of regressions where we divided our sample into two subsamples. Now, why these two subsamples? Because there is a possibility that whether disasters are happening in developing country or a developed country, it can also have a impact or a differential impact on bilateral trade. So generally, developed countries in terms of disaster preparedness, they are in a better position as compared to a developing country. So if disaster is happening in a developing country, then it can have there is a possibility that it has a differential impact as compared to the case when natural disasters are happening in a developed country. So to test for this possibility, we divided our sample into these two subsamples, and these are the broad results that we got. So for the case of agricultural trade, we found that if disaster is happening in a developing country, then magnitude-wise, it has greater impact as compared to the case when disaster is happening in a developed country. Similarly, we repeat the exercise for the manufacturing, so it has a more impact as compared to the case when disaster is happening in a developed country. And even in these subsamples, we find that especially for the case when disaster is happening in a developed country, for the case of manufacturing trade, storm is having a positive impact. Broadly, if I talk about the intuition, so disasters, they have a positive impact on agricultural trade. Now, generally, the goods of the agricultural sector, they are generally needed to meet the basic needs. So disaster hit countries, they may start importing agricultural goods to meet these basic food needs, and this could be one plausible reason for the positive relationship between the two variables. Another reason can be governments that they may temporarily reduce trade barriers to boost agricultural trade. Foreign nations also on humanitarian grounds, they may support uh, these kind of initiatives. And the, the reason that natural disasters, when they're happening in developing countries, they have a relatively more positively significant impact. The reason could be that if we look at developed countries, they have better storage system. So they might have lesser import dependence in the event of disaster. Uh, if we talk about the manufacturing sector, there is a decline in international trade, and can happen due to destruction of physical and human capital and due to rising trade costs. Now, interestingly, we have found that occurrence of storms, they have a positive impact. And this is one result. We are still trying to figure out what could be the reason. But I would like to mention one thing that we did. Right now we are doing the work in progress. Right now we are doing some robustness tests where we have dropped the outlier countries from a sample. And when we do that regression, there we find that this positive impact of storms becomes insignificant. So, so right now, broadly, these are the results that we have found. And going forward, we plan to do a, a lot of robustness tests that we have not done so far. And we would also like to see some general equilibrium effects. We would like to estimate those effects from the gravity results that I have reported. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present our work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spani. Saini, this has been a very interesting topic and very well researched, and I'm sure that it has generated a lot of curiosity. The next paper that we will listen to is the role of institutions in promoting exports, a gravity model by panel data approach. And this paper is by Dr. Achintya Kuswata, who is lecturer in economics at the Open University of Sri Lanka. His paper too will be an online presentation. And I request all the authors to remain and listen to everything, because at the end, of course, we will have open discussion and take questions from the floor about each paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
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 Thank you. And the title of my presentation is The Role of Institutions in Promoting Exports, Gravity Model by Panel Data Approach. So this work is a part of my PhD thesis at Swinburne University of Technology in Australia. So right at the beginning, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of my supervisors, both at Swinburne University of Technology, and also I did a visiting PhD fellowship at United Nations University in Helsinki for those supervisors also. I thought of starting my presentation with this photograph. This is a satellite photograph of North Korea and South Korea. So if you look at the picture, you can see how South Korea is developed compared to North Korea. South Korea is full of lights and North Korea is in the darkness. So this picture provides us a good example of how institutional quality led to different economic performances in different countries. To understand that, we will first have a look at the history of these two countries. Before 1945, Korea was a unified state with similar level of economic performance all over the country. On the 10th of August 1945, Korea was divided into two countries as North Korea and South Korea. Since that date, North and South Koreas are positioned in two separate extremes in terms of institutions and trade gains. So if you look at the first picture, you can see South Korea's development. Because South Korea is a highly developed trade-oriented economy, while North Korea is insanely isolated from the rest of the world. So according to the literature, the main reason for these differences is the quality of institutions. So now let's see what these institutions are. The most succinct definition of institutions comes from Douglas North, who defines institutions as the rules of the game in a society. And we can find two types of institutions, formal institutions and informal institutions. Examples for formal institutions include written laws, property rights, central banking, constitutions, human resource management, technology, innovation, and many other formal aspects of institutions. And informal institutions can help these formal institutions to shape. So such institutions are corruption, democracy, political stability, culture, ethics, executive constraints, and various other informal aspects of institutions. So in this paper, I have incorporated both formal and informal institutions. These are some of the examples of institutional quality indicators such as rule of law, business freedom, and labor freedom. Here we can observe a declining trend in all the institutional quality variables considered during this time. So this declining trend could be due to the recent international political uncertainties and also could be due to the revolutionary struggles and anti-government protests in some of the developing countries. Examples for political uncertainties in developing countries include Lebanon, Bolivia, and Iraq in 2019, Romania in 2017, Guatemala in 2015, and Nigeria in 2020. So all of these reasons could cause the declining trend in institutional quality indicators. So the main objective of this work is to investigate which domestic institutions affect manufacturing sector exports in developing countries. So the arrow 1 shows how institutional quality can affect manufacturing sector exports, because when the institutional quality is high in an economy, that can improve the exports of that country. Also, there can be a reverse effect from the exports to institutions, which is shown in green dotted lines here. Therefore, my research problem is how domestic institutions affect manufacturing sector real exports in developing countries. So these are some of the key literature. Atkin and Kandalwal 2020 paper says gains from trade are large in stronger institutional environments, and trade itself may improve the quality of institutions. And they propose two avenues for future research. First, to employ multiple sources and types of data, and second, to focus on specific industries using firm level data. And Sekira and Yankov paper 2014 says, in Mozambique, custom officials work with importers to reduce official tariff payments in exchange for bribes. So, and they say they regularly hold up importers by demanding additional fees to clear transactions. And Azimoglu and Robinson 2012 paper says institutions shape incentives, and incentives are important. And also they say many dysfunctional economic institutions are supported by a system of specific laws and regulations that are related to economic institutions. And Starts 2018 paper says, in Nigeria is a developing country, and in that country, wholesalers frequently travel on expensive international trips to meet international sellers to learn about innovations. But they say they never learn about their suppliers or innovations. And in that paper, they suggest that firms in developing countries benefit from advanced technologies and products that have already been developed in developed countries. So this is the estimating equation using a fixed effect sectoral gravity trade model. The independent variable denotes bilateral exports from country I to country J in industry K during time T. This includes 8,526 bilateral trade pairs in 22 two-digit manufacturing industries. And the explanatory variable, here institutions and institutional importance, is the institutional quality variable, and this includes 7 institutional quality indicators. Those are property rights, rule of law, control of corruption, business freedom, financial freedom, trade freedom, and tax friendliness. Previous studies employ institutional quality as a country level variable, but we believe each industry has a different intrinsic dependence on different types of institutions. For example, textiles and wearing apparel industry depend more on labor market related institutions. So in this paper, I use an interaction variable to capture both country and industry characteristics. So to represent the country characteristics, I have included the institutional quality variables, and industry characteristics are represented by importance of institution to each industry. For example, For property rights institutions, importance of institution to industry K variable is percentage of firms in industry K choosing access to land as their biggest obstacle. Then I weighted this variable to India's respondents survey and excluded India from the sample to avoid the reverse causality problem. And I've gathered data from 5 main sources: United Nations Comtrade data via WITS database, Heritage Foundation Freedom House data, World Bank Worldwide Governance Indicators, Varieties of Democracy data, and UNIDO data. And period between 2012 and 2021 in 22 two-digit manufacturing industries, covering 8,526 bilateral trade pairs in 51 developing countries. And I have classified countries into developed and developing using United Nations World Economic Situation Prospects in 2020. So these are the report and partner countries I have employed in this study. These countries have generated the 8,526 bilateral trade pairs. And these are the 22 two-digit manufacturing industries, which are denoted by industry K in the estimating equation. And the rationale for the empirical estimation, compared to the previous research, we have used multiple sources and types of institutional quality data. For example, in the previous papers such as Bonnell and Yaya, they have used only political institutions, but here we have used a combination of socio-economic and political institutions from different sources. And institutional quality indicator varies by country and industry. Most of the papers, institutional quality variable is taken only for the country specific variable. And we have weighted our interaction variable to India because we believe India has the depth and coverage across all the manufacturing industries compared to the other developing countries. And also we have a relatively large sample of countries and trade pairs. To analyze that, we have used panel data fixed effect sectoral gravity model. In the most of the previous literature, they have used cross-sectional gravity models. And these are the results of our correlation analysis. Property rights, rule of law, control of corruption are highly correlated compared to the other institutional quality indicators. And this is our main results. So according to the results, business freedom, rule of law, control of corruption, and property rights can generate greater effects on manufacturing sector exports in our selected developing country sample. And we have done separate regressions for these 3 regions: developing Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So when we consider the countries situated in developing Asia, improvements to the rule of law and property rights can have positive effects on manufacturing sector real exports. And if we consider Africa, improvements to the trade freedom can only have positive effects on manufacturing sector real exports in Africa. And when it comes to Latin America, in Latin America, improvements to the rule of law, control of corruption, property rights, financial freedom, and trade freedom can have positive effects on manufacturing sector real exports. So the conclusion, if developing countries need to improve their manufacturing sector exports, they first need to look at the business freedom, property rights, rule of law, and control of corruption before implementing policies to improve other institutions such as financial freedom, trade freedom, and tax friendliness. And we have a few recommendations in order to establish the rule of law in developing countries. Developing countries should focus more on enforceable contracts, and also developing countries can implement mechanisms to secure property rights. By doing this, they can improve their legal institutions, and that will help them to win the investors' confidence and attract more investments into their countries. And other thing is that in developing countries, they don't have good quality democratic systems. In the literature, most of the times their democratic systems are called broken democracies. So these countries should at least try to go for second best policies. And also they should invest more on education and leadership training, so that will help them to improve human capital stock and gather more trade opportunities in the future. So that will take a generation's time at least, but the developing countries should keep investing on that. And also we faced some limitations in terms of data quality. There are a lot of missing variables in our country sample. This could be mainly because countries rebase their economic performance indicators, which is very unrealistic. The example is in 2014, Nigeria overtook South Africa after rebasing their economic performance indicators. So because of these kind of things, we faced some limitations in terms of data quality. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you very much for listening to my work.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kuswada. We will, of course, return to you with questions afterwards. I will now introduce our third presenter, who is Mr. Himanshu Jaiswal. He's a PhD student at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai, India. And his co-author is Dr. Ganesh Kumar, who is a professor at the IGIDR, which is also the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in India. And their paper is titled Finding Some Good and Bad Practices in India's Trade Agreements, Evidence from the Rules of Origin Dataset. So please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm Himanshu. I'm a PhD scholar from IGIDR, and today I'll be talking about rules of origin, basically in India's trade agreements. And trade. What are the trade agreements? When we talk about trade agreements, basically there is a talk of tariff relaxations, but there is also a side of trade agreements that is called non-tariff measures. That is not very much negotiated, or sometimes that is not very much harmonized across the agreements of any country. So this is what I'll be talking about. And the rules of origin is one of those non-tariff measures which are very crucial for trade agreements, and also very integral to the agreements, because each rules of origin regime in every agreement is different than others. I think, is my slide moving?
No, your slide is not moving.
Okay. I think now it's moving, yeah. So my slide is, you can see my slide, yeah? Moving?
And now it is moving.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, so as I said that trading systems had two parts, tariffs and non-tariffs. So when we talk about tariffs, it's basically import duty or export duty, and non-tariff measures, that any measure that can act as an obstacle or hindrance to the international trade, it could be understood as any non-tariff measures. So one such non-tariff measure is rules of origin. That is very integral, because when we negotiate a trade agreement, we basically negotiate rules of origin and the tariff relaxations over the products. Actually, rules of origin are nothing but just a set of conditionalities or requirements that must be fulfilled to get preferential access. I mean, if I'll give some illustration in subsequent slides. So when these rules of origin are very stringent or very strict, they act against the purpose of FTA. I mean, the whole purpose of FTA is to liberalize the trade scenarios, but since they are very strict, they again act against the purpose of FTA. So what the motivation behind this study is, because FTAs are skyrocketing in the world, as well as India is also signing very agreements. Recently, India signed 3 new agreements, while in total there are 16 agreements are in force. So our study has focused on all the active agreements. So again, very India is in the negotiation of many agreements with its trading partner countries like UK, EU, EFTA, as well as Bangladesh. But at the same time, India was negotiating RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, but it's just walked out from RCEP at the 11th hour because it was not very sure about the benefits, because it was not very sure of rules of origin. Also, some sensitive sectors were there in RCEP. Also, India wants to renegotiate some already signed agreements because it's an impression of uh, policymakers that it is not benefiting India very much. So there are two contrasting stories that we have seen, and so FTAs are not very much beneficial at every time. So that's what the motivation is. So this is the classification of NTMs, where the rules of origin is at the row O. I mean, if you see row O, this is rules of origin. This is a classification by UNCTAD, MAST group classification. They have classified this in that way. So this is the rules of origin. So there are around 16 kind of non-technical, I mean, technical and non-technical measures. Rules of origin is one of them, non-technical measures. This is the tree map of rules of origin, how rules of origin are classified again. So there are two things that we should be concerned about: regime-wide rules and product-specific rules. So regime-wide rules are the rules which are applicable across the products, across all the things, like certification, how an exporter should get a certificate, or how it should be verified, or all the things. And product-specific rules are the rules that should be fulfilled to get preferential treatment under this FTA regime. And again, there is a classification. I'm not going into that. So this is an illustration how rules of origin are can act against the purpose of FTA. So this is an example from a Japan-Thailand Economic Partnership Agreement. So we have HS code of toaster's bread, that is 1905.40, and it is exporting to Japan. So, but the ingredient of this toasted bread is not all from Thailand. It's also from some other country which is non-party of this bilateral trade agreement. So flour is in there in this bread, and butter is in there in this bread. So now, whether this bread will be qualified as a originating material of Thailand when it is going to be exported to Japan or not, that's totally depends on the rules of origin here. And what is the rule here? We should see the rule. And rule is this: a change to subheading 1904.00 through 1904.05.40 from another chapter. So if there is any change, if there is any change from this range of HS codes from any subheading from any other chapter, it will be allowed. So it will be allowed in Japan. It will be allowed in Japan-Thailand agreement. But again, same thing will not be allowed in Japan-Vietnam agreement, because there is an exception that this thing, I mean, the roasted bread should not be made from any ingredient except that is, if it is taking any ingredient from chapter 11, and we have seen that it is taking ingredients from chapter 11. So it will not be counted as an originating product of Vietnam when it is exporting to Japan, while Thailand rule was not there, so it will be qualified as the originating material of Thailand. So this is how rules of origin act. So this is how the complexity is there. That was for illustration purpose. Now what literature says that rules of origin is a thing that cannot be avoided. So it has two kind of things, impacts, negative and positive. So negative impact is when they are very severe. This is negative impact. When they are very liberal, there are positive effects. So negation of effects of tariff reduction under an FTA, that is got by Cadet et al. Cadet et al. Says that if rules of origin are very severe, the tariff reductions effect will not be as much as accepted. Again, there are some paper by Anson and Carre Di Mello. They say that compliance cost by rules of origin is greater than the preferential margin, so they are not very much beneficial. And again, one thing is when such rules are very stringent, the utilization of FTA is very low. So since rules of origin is a custom part, and custom authorities don't produce data. So there are some studies, survey-based studies by Kawai Vignaraja, ITC, and Sriti Jha, 2013. They showed that it's a very underutilized FTA in all countries. In case of India, it is India, Sri Lanka, and its utilization rate is only 11%. So what is the benefit if you are doing such a huge thing and you are not benefiting? So these kind of things are there. And again, rules of severity index has been calculated by some author like Stewart, Dole, Cadet, and Harris, and also by uh, Harris, and also by Nagande as well. So this is kind of literature is there. It's a developing literature. Many people are working on that. So we have created a data set firstly here. This data set of the rules of origin by perusing all the text of the agreements of India, and it is basically related to chapter 3. Not chapter 3. Sometimes in most of the agreements is chapter 3, that is called rules of origin, and it's related annexures or list of the products and the related rules of origin. So we have created data set. For that data set, we have two parts: product specific rules and regime wide rules. And it's following the work of Angeli and et al. And they have worked around 300 trade agreements. And what we have done something different is there, because rules of this is we have two parts: product specific rules and regime wide rules. So regime wide rules has 10 provisions and total 63 questions, while we have added 31 new questions here. And in product specific rules, we have added just one newly added new question there. So it's like we are just filling the gap of the Angeli work. Yeah. These are the agreements that we have looked at, and the source is Rules of Origin Facilitator database. It's by WTO and ITC, also the by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. So some stylized facts from them is so certification thing is that okay, I think I have less time, so I'll just quickly summarize. So certification is that there are it's a documentary evidence that tells about the fulfillment of original criteria. So India, Japan, India, Chile, and India, Mercosur have a self-attested certification procedure, and the validity of certificate of origin is 12 months across the agreements. And there are some exceptions like India, Mercosur. And record keeping, 5 have 2 years, others have 5 years. I mean, these records should be kept for 5 years. And again, these 3 agreements provide a certificate exemptions in petty transactions. I mean, you don't have to take certificate of origin for every transaction. And certificate of origin with minor error is allowed in 10 agreements. And then verification and accumulation. I'll skip these things and I'll come to the simply. Okay, so methodology, we have created data set. And then for the creation of rules of origin index, we have severity index we have calculated actually. So for that, the values are between -1 to 1. And 0 to 1 show the liberalness, and the positive side is the liberalness of the regime, and the values, negative values are the restrictiveness of the regime. 0 signified the regime is neutral. Each question gets a value and this is a provision. And values are normalized in the range of -1 to 1. Average value of these normalized values is calculated. Then we have calculated, also we have looked upon orientation. Orientation is like how many agreements, how many provisions are negative provisions and how many are positive provisions. So this is kind of thing we have done here. So I'll just quickly go to the main results. These are the provisions and related questions. It's a very, I mean, big table, so it's not very clear to see. Again, these are the weighting scheme, how we have weighted. If anyone interested, I can share these things, but here it's not very much visible. So the weights are here, the questions are here, and the provisions are here. These are around 10 provisions here in all the agreements. And this is provision-wise grading. So we can see that India-Japan agreement certification, it's getting 0.5 out of -1 to 1. So it's a liberal regime in India-Japan agreement. The India, Mauritius, India, Malaysia, India, Korea, India, Australia, these are getting negative values. That means that their certification procedure is very tough. Also, the verification process across the agreements is very, very tough. Again, this is a trend for all the provisions in the agreements. So this is the orientation and overall grading. So the most liberal regime or of the agreements is India-Japan, that is getting score 7 out of 10, and it has only 3 negative, and its overall grade is A plus. That is plus signifies outward look. Outward look might mean a trade enhancing, while inward orientation is trade inhibiting. So this is how we have calculated, and um, as a conclusion, we can say India-Nepal is most liberal in partial scope agreement, and in multilateral trade agreement, ASEAN is most liberal regime, but SAFTA is a restrictive one. The very restrictive provision across the agreement is the verification process. Cumulation is a provision that is liberalizing in itself, but contained in all deals. That is a good provision. So de minimis also allows liberalness of the regime, but it is adopted in very few agreements. So what is the scope of harmonization and policy addition? That just having removed site inspection and retrospective verification process in the verification provision, this provision can be simplified. Even if there is also a provision of retrospective inspection, it should be coterminous with the certificate of origin validity. And also dispute settlement mechanisms should be more robust, transparent, and simple. The provision of advanced ruling should be adopted to hasten the process. So these are some things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jaswal. And we will get back to you with questions later. And the next and last paper is on mountains and asking the stimulating growth of, the title of the paper is Stimulating Growth and Employment through the Matarbari Deep Sea Port. And the paper is authored by Dr. Salim Raihan, Professor of Department of Economics, Mr. Abdul Ahad, who will be presenting the paper. He is a research associate of SANEM. And also there's a third author, Mr. Umar Rad Chowdhury, research associate of SANEM. Please go ahead, Mr. Ahad.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will be presenting the paper on stimulating growth and employment through the Matarbari Deep Sea Port. My co-authors are Dr. Salim Raihan and Umar Chowdhury. So as you all know, that Bangladesh will be graduating from LDC countries by 2026, and Bangladesh government have set numerous development goals for the next 15 years, such as becoming a developed country by 2041. Against this backdrop, Bangladesh needs actually strategic investment in infrastructure. And since, sorry. Sorry for the interruption. So investing in infrastructure becomes very crucial against this backdrop. Investment in infrastructure not only can boost the economy, but it also can mobilize the resources such as labor, capital. It also can attract the foreign direct investment. It has the ability to enhance the overall productivity of the country as well. So we focused on the Matarbari Deep Sea Port. Basically, we consider it as a game changer and one of the first deep sea port of the country. The largest seaport we have in our country is the Chittagong Seaport, which actually have a draft of only 9.5 meters, which actually restricts the trade and it cannot accommodate the mother vessels into the port. So mother deep sea ports implementation becomes very crucial in this matter. The port is likely to be completed by 2026. There is an overview of the Mother Bay Deep Sea Port. You can see the port actually started with 2 power plants, a deep sea port terminal, and a 14.5-kilometer long port channel. Basically, based on this paper, but I will be on the one aspect, that is the impact investment and projected export growth upon completion of the Mother Bay Deep Sea Port on 2 things, that is output and employment. The methodology we use for this it's a technical framework component that one is a secondary data analysis, that is data investment for the Mother Bay Deep Sea Port development, the data for the development of the port, and the second component is the economic assessment model, that is the central accounting metrics multiplier model, and the third component is the employment metrics, which we have formed from the labor force survey data 2017. And these 3 components actually are integrated into a model to assess the impact of output and employment rate. You can see the same data framework, the same data is for 2027. It has 219 accounts, 100 commodities, and 100 activities. The multiplayer model is here. I will not go into the detail of it. I will directly go to the simulations. Basically, I want to show what implications it will have if we can develop this mathematics report timely. So for the investment simulation, what we have done here is we incorporated the projected budget for the Mother Bay Deep Sea Port development, which is around 1.68, and this amount is projected across the period of 2022 to 2026. This amount is actually used as investment shock into the model. This shock is injected to the same exogenous account, and thereby allowing for the changes in the output and the employment. The results for the simulations, you can see that the investment shock is expected to generate an increase in 1.18% in the output, which will translate into a value of 6,163 3 million. And if you analyze it further, you will see that we have a largest share of output growth, which will be concentrated in the industry sector, followed by the service and the agriculture sector. More than half of the output will be produced in the industry sector. Regarding the employment generation, the low skill category is projected to experience the most significant job creation, followed by, of course, medium and high skill, as the labor dynamics or the labor dynamics of Bangladesh suggests actually. Interestingly, we have interesting results here that the simulation says the rural area will benefit considerably from the development of the Mother Bay Deep Sea Port. The investment can have a impact of more than 3 times job will be created compared to the rural region in the urban region. And you can see there the gender disparity persists. The result indicates that the males will likely to dominate the employment opportunities across all levels, all skill levels, and the location, of course. And we have another simulation, that is expert simulation. We have 2 separate simulations for the expert simulation. Since we have to inject the export shock into the exogenous account of the SAM, we first have to estimate the export shock value. To estimate the export shock value, first we took the Chittagong port's cargo handling capacity and the consequent export from that cargo capacity. and we were able to calculate the per TEU. TEU is basically the 20 feet equivalent unit that is calculated for the containers. So we have calculated the per TEU export, and we have taken the data of expected cargo handling capacity of Mata Bay deep seaport. We have two values here, that is 0.6 million and 1.1 million. The 0.6 million is the lower bound we took, and the upper bound is 1.1 million. So we were able to estimate the potential export growth from the construction of Mata Bay deep seaport. That value figures, you can see that is around, the lower bound is around 25% and the upper bound is around 45%. We use these figures for the export shock, and thereby again allowing for the changes in output and employment. If we move on to the results of it, you can see that we can see a considerable and a significant improvement in the activity output, that is output change of 6.83%. In the investment shock, we saw that the percentage change over base was around 1.83%, but the export shock shows a similar pattern of results, but with higher magnitude, of course. If we segregate the results into the broad categories, you'll find the similar patterns. The industry sector still dominates, followed by service and agriculture sector. But you can see that the impact on employment is higher. You see a massive jump. It will create around 4.5 million employment with a 25% increase in the export. As expected, and the labor dynamics of Bangladesh suggests that most of the employment will be generated in the lower category, as we have already seen in the investment shock. In terms of region-based segregation, rural region will be dominant. Here we can see the results are actually, the patterns are quite similar. The male workforce will be dominant here. In the second scenario, we have used we got the 45% increase of export from the export shock value, as we already mentioned, that is our upper bound, and the magnitude of the simulation is even higher compared to the 25% increase of export. But the pattern of the results are quite similar. You can see that still the industry sector dominates. You'll see that employment is much more generated in the 45% scenario. It is around around 10.47 million. The results are here also. You can see the lowest skill dominates. The rural dominates here, and the workforce will be male dominant, of course. And I'll jump into the conclusion, of course, that is the simulation results you can see that are very promising for Bangladesh. It can also become a very pivotal center for connectivity for the neighboring countries, as Mata Bay deep seaport is in such a location where it can connect to the northern states, landlocked northern states of India. It can connect to Nepal. It can connect to Bhutan. So it has a very significant political and geopolitical aspect as well. But where the challenges lies is the timely completion and the full operationalization of the project to actually unlock the full potential. Along with that, the challenges also lies in the broader regional cooperation, where we need some policy support to actually harness the maximum and the full potential or the full benefit out of Mata Bay deep seaport. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahad. And the next thing we will do is invite our discussant, Mr. Hussain, to go over the papers. Just so you know, this is how we will do things from now. After Mr. Hussain does his presentation on the discussing, I will open it up to the audience for questions. And then finally, I will wrap up by making some remarks on the papers myself. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chair and section. Good afternoon, and I'm very delighted and honored to be here today. So thank you so much, Sani, for inviting me. I must say that the topic of each of the four papers is very interesting and very relevant to this work. I have learned a lot from reading these papers. So I thank all the authors of the four papers and big congratulations to them. So without further ado, let me go through the main discussion. Discussing the four papers. So the first paper is on the impact of natural disasters on bilateral trade. The paper rightly points out that we need a deeper understanding of natural disasters and their impact on the economy as it poses a critical threat to macroeconomic stability. It also rightly says that trade is one of the channels through which disasters can cause economic disruptions by destroying human and physical capital. The authors applied the structural gravity model where they have used the PPML estimator. It is good that they used the PPML instead of OLS. They have explained the reasons why they have used PPML and why this is a better estimator than OLS. However, at the end of the day, every model has its limitations. So it is not clear from the presentation if the authors have mentioned the limitations of the structural gravity model and the PPML estimator in the paper. If they haven't, it would be great to write them, somewhere in the paper. The paper empirically investigates the relationship between natural disasters and international trade for a sample of 192 countries during the period of 1988 to 2019. This is a good sample size, I would say. However, in the presentation, it is mentioned that a panel of 180 countries has been considered for this exercise. So, what is the correct number? 192 or 180? Clarification would be helpful. The paper analyzes the impact of natural disasters on international trade, disaggregated by disaster types, such as flood, earthquake, and storm, and sectors, mainly agriculture and manufacturing. This is good. It helps to understand the varying and divergent effects of different types of disasters on different sectors, mainly agriculture and manufacturing sectors. However, this research does not include the impact of natural disasters on the service sector. Although the literature shows that on average or large natural disasters can reduce service exports by 2% to 3%. A bit of explanation on why the paper does not include the service sector would be beneficial. The paper states that the impact of disasters is significantly correlated with the income category of the affected regions. A list of countries by income type has been provided at the end of the paper. This is good. To see the list of the countries by income type, it would be great if the authors could share the impact of each of these countries in the next. This is a relevant study for disaster-prone countries like Bangladesh, as our honorable chair was mentioning at the beginning. And I'm sure academicians, researchers, and policymakers from countries like Bangladesh would be benefited from seeing the level of impact of natural disasters on the country's foreign trade. The authors have used a pretty large data set to do the whole exercise. However, in some cases, interpretation of the data may help to enhance the quality of the paper. For instance, it is stated that the gap between developing and developed countries in manufacturing trade increased except for 2015. And Also, the data confirms that manufacturing trade is higher in developed countries than in developing countries, except China. Why 2015 was exceptional? Why China, being an emerging and developing country, is doing better than the developed countries? I mean, some kind of explanation would be great. And say, for example, earthquakes have a more favorable impact on agricultural trade, whereas earthquakes are relatively more devastating for manufacturing sector. Why? I mean, here also a bit of explanation would be really helpful. The paper identifies a positive impact of natural disasters on international trade in the agricultural sector and an adverse effect on manufacturing trade. How should the policymakers from developing nations perceive these findings? I mean, is it good? Is it bad? Should they take any action? I mean, some policy prescriptions would be helpful at the end of the paper. And the last comment for this first paper is, in the future, the authors can explore how low institutional capacity and lack of good governance in developing countries may affect trade flows during natural disasters. So let me quickly move to the next paper.
If I may interrupt you for 1 second,
Sure.
I will give the authors a chance to respond after your comment.
Sure.
And they can have up to 2 minutes to respond, if that's okay. Thank you. No, I meant after you're all done.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. So the second paper brings up a very important issue. I mean, the role of institutions in promoting exports into the discussion table, and rightly pointed out from the literature that gains from trade are larger in stronger institutional environments, and trade itself may improve the quality of institutions. The authors have applied the sectoral gravity model where they have used a larger sample size. This is good, but the period considered is 2012 to 2021. So only 10 years where we have experienced the COVID-19, episode, one of the largest global economic crisis in more than a century. So it would be better if the period could be extended by some more years. The paper includes 7 variables as explanatory variables. This is a good list, I would say. However, it is not clear from the presentation if the authors have mentioned the rationale behind selecting these 7 variables. If they haven't, the consumers of this research would benefit from the explanation of why these variables have been selected. Find out other variables. The paper states that developing countries need to improve their export-led output growth. They need to first look at business freedom, poverty rights, rule of law, and control of corruption before implementing policies to improve other institutions, such as business freedom and investment freedom. How will they do it? I mean, the paper will benefit from giving some policy suggestions on how developing countries should proceed in doing so. So, for example, to improve the service of IPA, Investment Policy Agency, say for example in Bangladesh, PIDA is the investment promotion agency. How the improvement in quality of service by VIDA can help to improve the quality, the institutional quality that we are talking about, and can have a positive impact on the trade. Will digitalization of government to business services help to improve the quality? So this kind of explanation will be really helpful. 6 out of 7 institutional quality indicators generate positive and significant effects on manufacturing sector, real exports. However, the result shows that the effect of tax friendliness is negative. What are the potential reasons for this? A brief explanation would be really helpful. And in one of the slides, I was saying that business freedom can generate positive effects in Asia, but not in Latin America and Africa. Why? I mean, data is good. But the interpretation is data is very important. So a bit of explanation would be really helpful. So I'm almost done with the second paper. The key finding of the paper is very clear. Strong institutions are crucial for exports and overall economic growth. However, how is the export of RMG in Bangladesh has seen a rise despite having a weak institutional setup? I mean, the paper should briefly discuss the exceptions as well. And at the end, the limitations of the model should be mentioned somewhere in the paper. The third paper discusses the tariff and non-tariff measures, the classification of NTMs, the rules of origin, and its impact on the trade. This is good. The author has followed a very simple technique of questionnaire approach to identify whether a bilateral or multilateral agreement is liberal or restrictive. I mean, there is not much to comment. Yes, I will finish by 10 minutes. So there is not much to comment on from my side. However, it would be great to see some numbers on how India and its trading partners have benefited from liberal agreements or vice versa. So I'm quickly moving to the next last paper, the fourth paper. The fourth paper estimates the impact of investment in and export through the Matarbari deep sea port on output and employment. Let's start by saying that this is a good exercise to see how one of the country's mega projects is going to impact economic development. The paper applied the SAM 2017. SAM is a widely recognized model to estimate the economic impact of an intervention. And good thing is the authors have explained the limitations and assumptions of the model. So I can see that there are two separate simulations to demonstrate how investment in the Matarbari project and export increase through the port would impact output and employment, where you have used the labor force survey 2016-2017 to form the employment matrix. I mean, I can understand that the LFS 2016-2017 was the latest data that was available while we were doing this exercise, but now the FIS 2022 is available, so it would be interesting to see the impact using the latest FIS data. The estimation shows that the investment in Matarbari DSP and the exports to be materialized therein upon its completion will lead to higher GDP growth and employment creation. So, I mean, we are assuming that the work of developing this DSP will be completed on time and will start exporting immediately after the completion. So, I mean, this has been mentioned in the paper, so this is good. However, it will be interesting to have some estimations on how the delay in completion will affect the simulation results. I'm almost there. So, if the port is able to handle 0.6 million TEUs in 2026, the paper projects a 25% increase in exports from SAM base year 2017. And alternatively, if it handles 1.1 million TEUs in 2026, the study anticipated a 4.5% increase in exports. So these are the two scenarios you are considering. These are pretty good numbers. I mean, DSP may not be able to contribute from day one as projected. So some kind of rationalization would be helpful. And last comment, the investment projected to create a total of 0.935 million jobs between the years 2020 and 2026. Out of these total jobs creation, only 27.71% will be created for women. I mean, and for the second simulation on trade, the impact is similar. So what are the reasons why the percentage of share for female is low? Is it a cultural thing? Is it the type of job? I mean, that explanation would be really helpful. Again, the majority of jobs created by investment in Matarbari development project will be in the rural areas. The rural region, as mentioned, the rural region is expected to generate almost 3 times the number of jobs as the urban region. Why so? A bit of explanation again would be really great. So this is all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sen. I will now invite Dr. Saini to give a response. We've been asked to limit our time somewhat, so with apologies, I'll ask you to stay within 2. Thank you.
Sure. Uh, Thank you for providing such detailed comments. Um, So regarding the limitation of PPML, so the approach that we have followed, so one limitation the major limitation that our work is facing is the one that I cannot really distinguish between the impact of natural disasters when country is acting like an exporter vis-a-vis acting like an importer. So this has been mentioned. Also, the number of countries that we are taking, that is 180. So my apologies for the typo in the paper. About the policy prescriptions and the impact, like the country-wise impact on on trade of natural disasters. So these are some of the things that right now we are working upon, and also about the intuition behind why is it that earthquakes as a disaster type, they have a major impact on bilateral trade. So these are some of the things we are still trying to figure out what could be the reason. So yes, so these are some of the things that we are working upon. And yes, regarding the interpretation of data, we'll improve upon that, and also we'll think of a way in how we can factor in the impact of institutional quality on the relationship between the two variables. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sain. I will take this moment to add to that point rather than waiting till later because of our time crunch. When I was looking at your paper and I looked at the bilateral trade flows you were looking at, um, it was very difficult to understand if there's country I and J. If the natural disaster happened in country I, it should affect the import of country I and perhaps the export of country J, but nothing was coming through because of the nature of the data, because it's bilateral trade and you can't really understand what's going on. So if a coefficient is positive, you don't know whether it's because imports went up, exports went down, but imports went up more than exports went down, or what is going on. So I think you need a one-way flow of trade data to make any sense out of what is going on in this study. So that is just my simple comment, but I will write to you and send you a comments later. I would like to invite Mr. Jeswal to provide some responses, and then I will ask Dr. Proswata.
Thank you, ma'am. So I have one comment from sir that how India and trading partner have benefited from these non-tariff measures. So we are actually working on that, and for that we are taking rules of origin as given in the text of the agreement. And so, I mean, how they have gained or how they much have they lost, that we are estimating, and we will also run a counterfactual scenario where these non-tariff measures will be relaxed, and then how much they will gain. So this is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeswal. And I invite Dr. Proswata to give us her response, please.
Thank you, Professor, for giving me time to talk. And thank you so much, sir, for your comprehensive and detailed comments on my work. So I just submitted my PhD and completed it. Now I'm working on my paper. So I believe all these comments and suggestions are very important for the publication in a good journal. So I will start with the exceptional countries like Bangladesh. Yes, and China, we have got like extremely high number of exports, regardless of the institutional quality. So in our work, actually, we have done a lot of sensitivity tests and robustness tests, excluding those outlier countries, and also sometimes fragile economies, to check whether the results are following the same pattern. And it did not show any, like most of the times it did not show any significant difference. But I think, as you kindly suggested, to give a justification for the exceptional countries and their trade patterns. And also I will add limitations in the end of my paper. And also with regard to the comments related to Africa, in Africa there are a lot of like data issues. For example, in Western Africa, very few data for the countries we were able to find. This was because of the like they are not recording their data properly. Sometimes, like in Western Africa, there are conflict situations like Sierra Leone and Liberia for a long time. Likewise, because of those situations, and also they are doing a lot of like diamond mines, and there are some black market activities going on, so not recording all the data. So those problems are there when it comes to Africa, and to test their institutional quality. And all the other comments I will take in good spirit and make use of them in my papers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Puspaka. And now I invite Mr. Ahad to respond to Russell's comments.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Zuba, for the comment. So regarding the women's employment generation, which is around 27%. Actually, it shows that the labor participation rate would be around 27%, which actually matches the national figures, which is around 34%. So our results shows basically that the women's labor participation rate would be constant during that period, our study period. And regarding the comment on urban and rural employment generation, I think most of our, so we are basically working on it. So we are on a trial and error process. But one possible explanation to that would be our most of the employed people resides in rural areas, and that's why maybe the model showed that the employment generation would be also in the rural areas more than the urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Minina, graduate student, undergraduate student from National University, Department of Economics.
Please speak loudly because you cannot be seen.
So my question is for Ahad Bhai. I was hearing your fascinating presentation, but I was wondering, you're most certainly aware of the fact that another deep sea port is also building up in Rakhine. In maybe the name is Yaku, and India is also building an international highway bound for Thailand through Rakhine. So I was wondering whether you have explored the idea, the impacts you're talking about in your paper, whether those are going to be crowded out or offset in some way because of those factors. That was the question. Thank you.
We can take one more question and then have the response, or maybe a couple more, and then we can end.
Hello. Hello, I'm Arlington from the University of Dhaka, Department of Economics. So my question is to Dr. Puspaka. My question is to Dr. Puspaka. So in your opening remark about the Korean Peninsula, can the darkness in North Korea be attributed only to the bad institutions, or the fact that they are a very closed economy, which means they have very restrictive trade policies there? And another question I have regarding Korea as well. As you can see, that the South Korean government has really good institutions that are really out there promoting their exports. But this promotion has given way to some high inequalities within their domestic market. So is there any way that you would integrate those factors in your research? Like some good intentions can sometimes give birth to some bad results.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Hello, I'm Movi from Jahangirnagar University, Department of Economics. My question for Swati Saini ma'am. Since you have mentioned in your paper that there is a positive impact of natural disaster on international trade in agriculture sector, it seems unlikely in reality since whenever any country faces major disaster, for example, Nepal or Turkey, we did not notice any positive impact on their international trade in terms of agriculture.
Thank you very much. And just to balance everything, since we talked about balance earlier in another session, I will ask Mr. Jaiswal a question so that you are also able to respond. And my question to you is pretty much the same as the discussants, is that you have done this exercise of collecting the rules of origin to see, and given the numbers and weights, to see which is more restrictive, which is not, and then you have decided which trade agreements are more liberal and which ones are not. Is there any way that you could look at the trade that India has had with Japan or with Chile or any of these places to see if there's been any growth since these agreements have been put into place? Or can you speak to other studies that perhaps look at the numbers and not simply look at the, an assessment of the rules? Thank you. Please go ahead with the responses. Mr. Hutt first.
Okay, thank you so much, Munam, for the very important question. So basically, SAM doesn't allow for the dynamic changes into the model. It actually somewhat static and linear, so we cannot incorporate it into the model. But the point you raise is very important. We'll try to somehow incorporate in our paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Saini can respond next if you like.
Yes, sure. So as I mentioned that given the limitation that we are facing because of the methodology, the approach, so we are looking at a country pair, the trade between that country pair. So if a natural disaster happens in a developing country, in that country pair, there is an increase in agricultural trade. Now, within that country pair, that developing country, whether it's an exporter or importer, like we don't know definitely. And so that's why we can just comment that in a country pair, if natural disaster is happening in a developing country, it leads to an increase in agricultural trade. So the example that has been cited of Nepal and Turkey, so maybe as an exporter, their trade may not have increased post-disaster, but definitely on the humanitarian grounds, they have got a lot of aid. So their imports would have increased. So in that sense, like I'm saying that, so the results are saying that agricultural trade has increased, but we cannot really definitely say whether it's on the exporter side or on the importer side because of the limitation of the approach that we have adopted. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Saini. May I ask Dr. Paswata to respond?
Thanks for the question related to North Korea and South Korea example. I just have taken that example because by looking at the data, the institutional quality data from the World Bank Worldwide Governance Indicators. So for example, if you look at the regulatory quality index there, you will find South Korea among the top 10 countries and North Korea in the bottom 10 countries. So sometimes the closeness or the bureaucratic problems may cause those negative signs or the lower marks for the institutional quality in North Korea. So that's the rationale, and I took it as a motivation to the research at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to give an applause to all our presenters and our discussants. Thank you very much. And I was supposed to make remarks, but I think that we are very short of time, and my remarks were actually going to extend the discussion because I read the papers and had some comments. So what I will do instead is take little points and email them to our presenters. And thank you so much for participating in this South Asia Network on Economic Modeling. I hope the audience has learned some interesting things from this exercise, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your presentation. And now we'll be requesting ma'am to give the certificate to the presenter. And for the online participants, we will be sending you through email your certificate. So please can wait.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. My apologies that you all have missed being here and getting this in person. And
By this comes in this concept of mindful labor force participation rate, even labor force participation rate.